At the very bottom of the Pacific Ocean lies a scar in the earth so deep that if Mount Everest were dropped inside, its peak would still be buried under more than a mile of water. This is the Mariana Trench, home to Challenger Deep, the deepest known point in the world's oceans, reaching nearly 11 kilometers below the surface. For most of human history, the deep ocean was pure myth. Sailors imagined sea monsters, bottomless pits, and crushing darkness no human could ever survive. Yet in just over a century, people went from guessing how deep the ocean might be to physically standing on the floor of the Mariana Trench. This is the story of how humanity got there, the inventions, the risks, the near disasters, and the handful of people who have actually visited the deepest place on Earth. The journey begins in the 1870s with a British research ship called HMS Challenger. Between 1872 and 1876, Challenger sailed around the world, lowering heavy ropes with weights into the sea and measuring how far they sank. Near the Mariana Islands in the western Pacific, the crew recorded an astonishing depth of about 8,184 meters, far deeper than anything previously measured. At the time, nobody could confirm whether this was truly the deepest point, but that single measurement put the region on the map as a possible extreme abyss. Decades later, in 1951, another British vessel, HMS Challenger 2, returned with new technology: echo sounding using sound pulses to measure depth. Challenger 2 located a narrow pit reaching nearly 11,000 meters down, and the deepest spot it measured was named Challenger Deep, in honor of the original expedition. By the mid-20th century, scientists knew roughly how deep the trench was, but they had no way to send humans safely into that crushing pressure. At the bottom of Challenger Deep, the water pushes with more than 1,000 times the pressure at sea level, enough to crush ordinary submarines like empty soda cans. To reach such depths, engineers needed something entirely different from a normal submarine. The breakthrough came from Auguste Piccard, a Swiss scientist and inventor obsessed with extremes. He first went up into the stratosphere in a pressurized balloon cabin. Then he flipped the idea upside down and designed a deep-diving craft called a bathyscaphe, literally deep boat. Instead of relying on heavy metal alone, Piccard's design used a large float filled with gasoline for buoyancy, because gasoline is lighter than water and does not compress much under pressure. Hanging beneath this float was a small, incredibly strong steel sphere where the crew would sit, with walls around 12.7 centimeters thick to survive deep ocean pressure. To sink, the craft carried tons of iron pellets as ballast, held in place by electromagnets. To rise, the magnets were switched off. The pellets fell away, and the buoyant float pulled the sphere back to the surface. This design became the basis for the bathyscaphe Trieste, built in Italy to Piccard's plans and later purchased and modified by the United States Navy. Trieste was never sleek or fast. It looked like a fat white cylinder with a steel ball hanging under it. But it was built with one purpose: to go deeper than any human had ever gone before. The first descent, Trieste, 1960, on January 23, 1960, in the middle of the Pacific, Trieste prepared to attempt what many considered impossible: a crewed descent to the bottom of Challenger Deep. Inside the cramped pressure sphere were just two men: Swiss engineer Jacques Piccard, Auguste's son, and U.S. Navy Lieutenant Don Walsh. The descent took almost 5 hours. Outside, sunlight vanished within the first few hundred meters, and the water turned from blue to black as Trieste slowly sank through the twilight zone, then the midnight zone of the ocean. At about 9,000 meters, the men heard a loud bang and felt the craft shudder. One of the outer plexiglass windows had cracked under the immense pressure, but the main steel sphere held firm. They continued downward into pressures exceeding 1,000 atmospheres, more than 1.25 metric tons, pressing on every square centimeter of the hull. Finally, after nearly 11 kilometers of descent, Trieste touched down on the floor of Challenger Deep, at a depth of around 10,900 meters. Outside the viewport, there was no bare rock. Instead, a fine, light-colored sediment billowed up like smoke where the craft landed. Pickard and Walsh spent about 20 minutes on the seafloor. They observed what looked like flatfish or some kind of bottom-dwelling organism, proving that life could indeed exist under such extreme pressure. Then they released ballast and began the slow ascent, taking another 3 hours to return to the world of light and air. The Trieste dive shocked the world. For the first time, humans had visited the deepest known part of the ocean and come back alive. Yet despite this success, nobody would repeat the feat for more than half a century. In the early 2000s, a new privately funded project set out to build a next-generation deep-diving submersible, Deep Sea Challenger. The reasons are simple: cost, risk, and extreme engineering demands. Designing a pressure hull that can survive 11,000 meters is a monumental challenge, requiring exotic materials, precise machining, and unforgiving testing. Operating such a submersible also requires a dedicated support ship, a specialized crew, and favorable weather conditions in a remote part of the Pacific. Even with modern technology, something as small as a faulty valve or a power failure could be fatal at those depths. Every descent to Challenger Deep is a carefully calculated risk, and every successful return adds knowledge that makes the next mission slightly safer. And as long as there is still unexplored darkness at the bottom of the ocean, there will always be another dive to plan.